Today's video is about vinyl, or it's about turntables. And why would you want a turntable? I'm going to talk today about the Rega Planar 3 2016 and my experiences with that turntable over the course of about 9, almost 10 years now. When I got into records, it was probably like 2010, 11. And really, it was my friend who had this old, like, crappy Newmark turntable, and we just hooked it up for fun. And then that's really what started this whole journey. And so back then, in those days, it was really about finding music. And I wasn't necessarily searching for the best quality records in terms of like actually sound quality, or I wasn't necessarily looking for like hard to find grails. I should say that I was in college, and so money was really tight back then. But at least in those earlier days of like this resurgence in vinyl, we were really going out and finding bottom of the barrel, cheap stuff that was $1, less than $5. And that's really how I got a majority of my records. And I think like over time, as this resurgence has taken off, we've really seen a lot of these older records be repressed. We've seen the quality kind of like, ebb and flow with the demand. So with that being said, the price of records has really gone up. And so today I still buy records. Today I'm a little bit more disciplined and more intentful in my approach behind records, but it is still one of my main listening formats. And in fact, I think it's the main preferred means for me to listen to music. I can listen to digital music all day long while I'm at work or on the computer, but really for me, records is about having this very intentional experience where we come home and we put on a record and we sit there and we listen to the entire thing. And so going back as far as 2011, I think for me, that's what records were about, because as somebody that came from this MP3 world, we always had convenience in being number one. I shouldn't say that, because I definitely had CDs and even cassettes when I was really young, but majority of my formative years listening to music, I think, came from that era of MP3s. It started in CDs, and then we started ripping those CDs to our iPods, right? So discovering vinyl for me in 2011 was like going back in time and learning how people once experienced music, and then also, like, I think learning that the process of that was way more intentional and thoughtful. And it's something that I think we consider almost like a live experience in our living rooms. And so that's really why I'm here today, to talk about the Rega Planar 3 in relation to that kind of experience, or that targeted experience. Of what I'm essentially going for with music is to create this immersive experience where we come home and we listen intently. And so my review is going to really touch on how I think the Rega is going to help you in that pursuit. And I think with that, I want to talk a bit about, the build quality and the construction. I'll talk a bit about the sound quality. I'll talk about what components or phono preamps that I've paired with it over the years. I'll talk a little bit about the upgrades and some of the things that I've done to it to help improve its quality. And really, like, let me just start off by saying that I think this turntable is absolutely incredible. And, throughout this, you may ask yourself, well, should I buy this turntable? Should I buy a different one? Should I look elsewhere? I'll try to answer that question. I think ultimately this is really going to come down to what your specific needs are. When I purchased this turntable, there was not the number of options on the market that there are today. So, 10 years ago, I would have been looking at like an Audio-Technica AT-LP 120 or 240 LP, I believe, or some of those Audio-Technica turntables that were coming out. I want to say U-Turn Orbit was just coming out during that era as well, or shortly thereafter. And they're a great option today, but I don't think they were necessarily in my scope. What I want to say about my philosophy when it comes to turntables is that really it's my understanding that a turntable is a mechanism, it's a machine. And thinking about the wear and tear of that machine and the use of it over the course of its life and just what it's going to see. So, unlike so many other things that we're going to buy in this hobby, I think a turntable is unique in that we need to consider that this is a piece of equipment, much like any other machine or a car for that matter, or just something that needs to be maintained. It needs to be listened to, it needs to be paid attention to. And so, having said all that, I really think of a turntable as an investment. And so when I purchased this turntable, I think that is how I perceived of it, as this long-term investment that would last me minimum 10 years. And so I'm coming up on that 10-year mark. And at least in that time, the time has flown by so fast, because like certainly when I look at this turntable every day, it doesn't tell me that it's 10 years old. It doesn't scream vintage or anything like that. And it's kind of cool because this design came out in like 1978-ish or something like that, or late 80s. And still to this day, all these years later, this turntable looks as modern, as sleek, and just contemporary. So I think like in terms of its aesthetic, I think it's got this long lasting design, or at least it's become the Rega, like the Rega design, the iconic design. I'll just say that like for me, I think records are this very special thing. And so even though I listen to digital, this is really where I want to, I think, start my experience, really from the sense of how can I make this an immersive, interactive experience. And so this is why I encourage people to invest in a turntable, because it's going to be this thing that's going to continue to play these records years from now. And it kind of ages alongside all of your other records. It's like it's all one. The turntable, the record, it creates this immersive experience, right? So yeah, I'll just kind of leave it that part at that. Rega as a company and a manufacturer is known. This is like their whole shtick is engineering. And so I think that Rega's ethos around design and engineering is what really resonated with me. In addition to the perceived sound quality or even the visual aesthetics, or just its like, its overall hype of this brand and this turntable across the community. Those things, in addition to the ethos that is Rega, is really what I think made me look at Rega. Now, 10 years ago, I didn't necessarily know as much about turntables as I do today. So it is a question, like 10 years ago, would I have purchased this turntable? That is a serious question I think I ask myself today. I don't think my goals have changed. I'm more curious about what other options are out there on the marketplace, especially now, with this resurgence. Now I think of it as like we're like 10 years into this vinyl resurgence or more. And now today there's more options than ever before. So um, when you buy this turntable, and I purchased it from a local dealer near me in 2016, like right upon release date. At that time, the red version wasn't even available for ordering here in the United States. So that was something that I had to pre-order and then wait an additional 2 weeks for it to show up. The shop helped me hook it all up and get it set up, but you know, even having said that, really you can buy this turntable from a website, and you know you're going to come home and you're going to pull it out of the box, and it's pretty plug and play. There's not a whole lot that you really need to do. I mean, compared to other turntables that I have used, there's a lot more setup or a lot more things involved. Really, one of the more difficult things to do is just to mount a cartridge, and Rega makes that so incredibly easy with the cartridges that are available. They're designed to basically plug and play right into the Rega tone arm. Having said that, I think that it's a really simple table to set up, and it's perceived value, I think, hits you right out of the box. I mean, initially you're gonna think, wow, what a great, like, what a great table. It's like the first couple of years of ownership with this thing, it never ever dulled for me, my sense of like enthusiasm for it. It's something that you're going to look at every single day, every time you go to play a record, and it's just like, yeah, I own that, right? So my experience, you know, has been extremely positive with this turntable. Its build quality is incredible. The tone arm, the tolerances, everything about this thing just screams well made. And I never once felt like, this thing is gonna break on me. So like on that subject of build quality, I could not speak more highly about it except for maybe one minor complaint. And it's a weird one because I say minor, but it could also be a deal breaker, I think, as well. And for me, the big deal breaker in when we talk about the fit and finish of it is the finish. The red finish version that I bought, when you pull it out of the box and you pull the cellophane off of it and all of that, I mean, it looks like glass. And like right away that that thing is going to be so difficult to clean. For the first year of ownership, I didn't want to touch it because I knew that if you touch this surface, it's going to leave swirl marks. So it's really challenging. I don't see a lot of guidance online for how to keep it clean or how to keep it maintained. But essentially what's going to happen is you're going to want to clean this thing. And when you do, whether you use a microfiber cloth or not, there's a high probability that you're going to leave swirl marks behind in the finish. The reason why I say it's kind of like minor, but also kind of not, is because it's not like so glaring that you're going to see it from the couch. But it's something that, like, in a sunny climate, or today it's very sunny in here, when I get up close or when I look at it from certain angles, you can certainly see those swirl marks. And so it's just kind of a shame that they designed this product that I think will last 10-20 years, but then like the finish is not going to last 10 to 20 years. So it's something that you have to be cognizant of. So like, yeah, it's so beautiful, but it's kind of a drawback to it as well. And so I think if you're somebody that's kind of particular, or that's something that might drive you crazy, then I think you need to look for a different finish, or you need to look elsewhere. In terms of like tone arm construction and the balance and the weight and the feel of it all, again, it just feels incredible. I mean, there's zero tolerance or play in this tone arm. And again, coming from like a cheaper turntable, which I've used like duals or older vintage Audio Technicas, I've had a Harman Kardon turntable, which was the one that I had before this. All those turntables had play and movement in that tone arm. Like, a certain amount that by comparison, I now think feels like a toy, right? Because you're like, well, what is this thing? Like there's cheaper turntables out there that you get the sense that like this thing was built in a really cheap garage, versus a Rega or some of these more well-crafted machined items. These feel like they were crafted in a laboratory, right? And they really were, because Rega's research into turntables, if you look at their highest end turntable, the Naiad, it's like a 30,000 euro turntable, I believe. And Rega developed that turntable with Formula One engineers. And so there's an incredible amount of engineering prowess and thoughtfulness that goes into these turntables. So, again, maybe this isn't the aesthetic ethos. They're not making this big wooden, beautiful, like plinth with gold and flashy colors or whatever, or flashy metals. But I think what you're going to get is like, you are effectively paying for the mechanism and the machining. You're paying for this incredibly well-functioning item. So having said that, $1,500 seems like a lot of money, but it's really not. It's really not when you consider what a turntable is, how long it needs to last, the wear and tear on it. Just the fact that it is a moving item means that this thing is going to have a lot more wear and tear on it. It's something you're going to touch every single day. I think this is a turntable for people that, or This is a turntable for people where that messaging of engineering, quality, craftsmanship, and design is going to resonate. At least for me, that is a main reason I think why I looked at Rega. Reliability and the engineering factor. And so what solidified it for me ultimately was, I watched there's like a multi-part tour of the Rega factory on YouTube that you can watch. The founder of Rega, and he just the way that he speaks so passionately about makers and these people that create these items, it just gave me so much respect for the guy. And you got to think that if this is a man who owns the company and has this much respect for the people that are making his product, then he has just the utmost respect for the entire company, right? When I purchased this turntable, it came with the Rega Elise 2 cartridge, which is the blue one. And at that time, there was options. You could buy different cartridges, but that's just what I decided to go with. I guess overall, I'll talk about sound characteristics of the turntable as I remember it back then. I guess, when I first purchased it, prior to any upgrades, which I'll talk about the upgrades and how that affected the sound, really, you're given an incredibly transparent, lively, energetic turntable. I mean, I came from older turntables, so I didn't really have a reference for how vinyl could be so engaging. I think more or less, and I'll talk about this in relation to amplifiers or other things, but Rega is not meant to give you a laid back listening experience. In my opinion, if that's what you're going for, I think you want to be looking for a high mass turntable. This turntable is light, it weighs nothing. And as a result of that, typically with a low mass turntable design, you're going to get more top end extension and more highs. And so with that, that top end extension lends itself to being this incredibly engaging edge of seat like listening experience. And so, I'll talk about so like LCD Sound System, This Is Happening is an album that I had heard 100 times on digital. But it wasn't until I got this on vinyl that I came home and put this on, and it was like a whole other layer of top end extension jumps out at you. It is so, this album is so engaged. It hits so hard. It is so engaging on a turntable versus what I had heard it on digital, right? Totally not expected. And I think that I use this as an example to speak to what I believe is the overall tonal characteristics of Rega. That being said, vinyl is still vinyl. Digital is still digital. But when I compare my Rega table with some of the Phono preamps and with the Rega Elise 2 cartridge, to me, it was an incredibly engaging, lively-like experience. And so, today I've got a Nagaoka MP200 cartridge on there, and when I put that on it, it definitely toned down some of that top end extension, and I think it brought up the mid-range. It's not totally a mid-range experience. It's still pretty dynamic, but again, compared to the Elise 2, I have had this thing hooked up to like 6 different phono preamps. What I'll say is that it will take on the characteristic of the equipment that you place in front or after it. It is an incredibly transparent, neutral sounding turntable. One of the Phono preamps I had hooked up to this was I had a vintage Marantz 2265B that was old vintage, and I used the Phono in that, and that was super lush and just so mid-range and kind of sweet. And Marantz has this almost very addictive mid-range type quality to it, or V-shaped sound signature. I had it hooked up to a Rogue Audio Sphinx V2 for a long time. There again, that particular amplifier was a Class D with a hybrid tube amp in it. So more or less it had a Class D signature to it, which super top endy. My gosh, it was so holographic with that setup though, that really it was so holographic and incredible, but it had such terrible fatigue. It was one of those things that for 2 hours you were going to enter into the best listening experience of your life, But then after those 2 hours, you were just exhausted. There's so much detail, so much top end extension, and it was so holographic. Something about that particular setup had music or the top end just fluttering throughout the space in such a way that to me, it sounded like it was coming from inside my head. And it was an incredibly weird, unique experience, I guess. But then I've had it hooked up to the Skit Manny V2, and I did not like that pairing. I won't even really talk about it. I don't think that the shit Phono preamps work very well with the Rega gear. And I don't know why that is. I think it has something to do with the way that Rega grounds their tables, or lack of grounding versus how Skit is grounding their equipment. Yeah, I digress. But the other Phono preamp that I've hooked up to this was the HiFi Zen Phono pre. I really liked this Phono pre, but I think it completely changes the whole characteristics of vinyl, in that when I had it hooked up to that, there's so many instances where I kept telling myself I'm listening to digital. I'm listening to a CD. I don't know why that is, but to me, the characteristics of the HiFi Zen with the Rega brought something too digital to my ears. For me, my goal with records is to have natural sounding music. And so when things become almost too digital, too accurate, you lose, I think, some of that. Yeah, I don't know, but you just kind of lose some of that naturalness, that what we ultimately are searching for. It's not always just about accuracy, right? So it wasn't until I got the Rega Phono, and then I also purchased at the same exact time the Rega PSU, that I felt like the overall sound signature was more or less balanced, probably like for the first time in its life. I shouldn't say that it wasn't balanced. I think, let me just put it to you this way: with my current situation in my space, with whatever equipment that I had at that time, there was just lots of top end extension. And I think part of that is the massive volume of this room, and there's not a lot of acoustics, and I don't have carpet. So I think trying to tame some of those highs has always been my goal. So I want to talk a little bit about upgrades. And, so since I've owned this turntable, in the 9 years that I've upgraded it, I've replaced the feet, I've replaced the belt, and I have replaced the turntable mat, and I've replaced the stylus. Probably the two biggest impactful things that you can do for upgrading this turntable is going to be the belt, and then possibly the power supply. Because I could also see the cartridge being very impactful as well too. I mean, the cartridge is drastically going to overall change the sound, or it could. That being said, what the PSU is going to allow you to hear is farther into the track. It's going to produce blacker backgrounds. It's going to produce better speed or more accurate speed. I don't think this turntable has any inaccuracies in speed, but what I will say is that when I did hook up the PSU, I did notice that the turntable had drifted in speed, or the speed had drifted, and it was running a little bit slower. That being said, it's 9 years old. It is a question of, should I buy that PSU with a Rega P3, or should I just go ahead and upgrade to the Planar 6 and just skip the P3 altogether? Well, I think that's really a question for your overall goals and what your long-term outlook on vinyl looks like. I mean, if you're somebody that you're going to have vinyl for the next 10 years, maybe possibly consider a Planar 6, because a fully decked out Planar 3 with the power supply is going to be about the difference of a Planar 6 with no cartridge. So that $1,500 plus your $350 PSU, it brings you up to $1,800. And, that's about the price of a Planar 6 with no cartridge, right? So I don't think you need the power supply. I think the Planar 3 is the perfect starter table for the fact that you can buy it and not have a need to have that power supply, so long as you're not playing a lot of 45s, or you don't mind picking up the platter. Because I should say, with the Planar 3, in order to change the speed, you have to pick up the platter and you have to reposition the belt. In my opinion, after many years of ownership, I did start to become uncomfortable with it. Primarily because every time you pick that thing up, it's one more chance that you could accidentally drop it. It's one more kind of opportunity to continually wear out the spindle as you put that thing on and off. And all of those things, if you're not doing frequently, they're not really a big deal breaker. That being said, I always had a goal to upgrade my Planar 3 to a level that is on par with the Planar 6. And my thought was always, throughout the years, I could slowly upgrade it, or every year I could maybe buy a new component or a new part. And so I kind of have done that every couple of years. I bought a new part for it, upgraded this or whatever. I do ask the question, though, these days, does it make sense to continually pursue those upgrade paths when maybe what I really want to do next is just get a whole new turntable? One of the other upgrades that I felt was necessary almost immediately out of the gate were the feet. My apartment that I live in is really old, over 100 years old, and therefore my floors are a little warped and not completely level. If you're somebody that has unlevel floors, or you have a condition where you're going to have issues with placement, you're going to find that this turntable is not going to provide you with literally any means to adjust feet. What I'll say is that with these feet, the pre-existing holes that it comes with, it's using a wood screw of some kind that screws onto the bottom of these, and these new ones are using a metal thread. So the threading on these doesn't exactly match up, and so what they have you do is they have you screw in these much larger screws into the existing holes. And so I'll show you a picture of it, but you can kind of see where the laminate on the underside of the turntable has kind of warped out, or become, well, I'll show you a picture you can see, but essentially that laminate has now, it's caused a stress in it because of the screw going into that hole is larger than what the pre-existing hole was. And so I think if you buy these feet, it's more than likely you're never going to want to take them off. Or if you do, only take them off maybe once in your lifetime, because I'm afraid that if you increase that hole any larger than what it was, there's a chance you might not be able to get back on the existing feet if that's what you were trying to do. That being said, for me, the feet were a huge upgrade, because I think what it did, for me at least, was it helped bring in some isolation, which you don't need to have these feet to completely isolate your turntable. There's platforms and other products out there on the market Um, you could even just evaluate, a cutting board and, layering up a cutting board with some ball bearings in the little, grease groove around the edge perimeter. So there's a lot of like options to isolate your turntable. So why get these feet then that, are relatively expensive to like a cheaper solution? And it's really simple. It's the fact that my apartment that I live in is very old and the floors are not level. So having these feet, it just allows me to adjust the table. And I'll also say like the amount that I needed to adjust it for my particular situation was relatively extreme. And so you can kind of see that, when I'm filming this, you'll see that one side of the turntable is picked up quite more so than the other side. Um, you know, that's not like I'm not doing that intentionally. It's simply because the floor is not level. So for me in my use case, I think that this is a necessary upgrade. And yeah, it's just a major quality of life upgrade for the turntable and allows you to move it around. Um, in addition to those feet, one of the other upgrades that I've put on this turntable is a new belt. So Rega sells a belt that you can buy, and I don't know what the cost of it is. Essentially they advertise this belt to improve the sonic quality or the dynamics, and I don't know, maybe the speed. Essentially all it is a tighter or a better manufactured belt. It just has tighter tolerances essentially than the belt that comes on the table. And it sounds crazy, but I really believe this was a huge upgrade for me, more so than you really believe. I really do say that. I think for me, it in similar fashion as the feed, I think this has helped is bring up some of the mid bass a little bit and help kind of uh, create a more isolated foundation in the bass. And so then one of the other upgrades that I've done is I've went ahead and I replaced the mat that comes with it. Uh, Rega will tell you that the mat that comes on it is how they engineered it or how they designed it to work with that felt mat. But in my experience, just over the course of so many years of using this table, it's my opinion that I think the felt mat is more of a negative than any kind of positive. And the reason being is really simple. The felt mat attracts way too much dust, way too much static electricity. And it's one of those things that, I have a record cleaner and I will clean them and put them in anti-static slip bags and all of that. And it didn't matter how much of that I did. For whatever reason, my experience is that the Rega table with that felt mat produces such a massive amount of static electricity. It's one of those things where you can be like wiping the dust off of the record and it's flying through the air and sticking back onto the record. And once I replaced that, the results were dramatic, like so dramatic for me that I don't really have this major issue with dust like I once did. I still get dust and it's still an everyday activity that I need to tackle, but I'm not getting this thing where records are really like retaining static and it's like I can't get the static electricity off the record. So I think that the turntable mat is really helping with that. In terms of sonic characteristics, this thing for me, I think helped again in similar fashion to what my other upgrades have done is I think it helped bring out a little bit more mid-range and help bring up the bass response of the table a little bit. And so the Funkfirm Acromat is a super expensive solution if your main goal is to just reduce static electricity. And you can go on their website and they talk about how this thing is designed to help dissipate energy and do all of these things. I can't really necessarily speak about that, but what I'll say is if we just consider glass as a material, the glass platter that it comes on this table, glass is a resonant, or it has a resonant quality to it. It's very dense, but it also, can have that resonant quality. And so when you add this other material on top of the glass, I think what it's really doing is it's help deadening the sound a bit and help reducing that amount of resonance that's coming out of the glass platter. So, it's sort of like, and in my mind, it's kind of a tweak to make the table a little bit more of a high mass sounding turntable. Um, It's not a bad turntable, and that's what I want to preface this by saying is that it's not a bad turntable. I think that the fact that you can do those minor upgrades to maybe bring it up to be a little bit more balanced to your liking is huge. And then, in addition to just, I think some of the other qualities or the other things that these solutions have helped solve for me makes them necessary. And so you might be asking, like, well, if you needed all those from the get-go, then why didn't you just look at a different turntable, right? And that's a fair assessment. There are turntables that I could buy that either have self-leveling feet or just more adjustability than what's currently in this. And I think that really for me, that's just a preference in maybe the way that I see the world, the way that I think about these things. I am very much a tinker and a player, and I like to be able to make those minor adjustments or those tweaks. Or really, it's just about customization. I mean, a turntable is kind of like this high-end sports car in your living room, or a turntable could be a high-end sports car for somebody that can't afford a sports car or somebody that doesn't drive a car, right? And so there's just a lot of hot rodding, I think, that goes on in the Rega community, or at least there was a lot of that. The upgradability path is major on a Rega table, and I think this is a huge reason why you look at buying a Rega table. And you could go as far to the point that like it's no longer even a planar 3 anymore, and now it's just like a completely custom table. So at least for me, that was very attractive and appealing, and something that I was really interested in kind of like having. So I want to talk a little bit about I think like who this turntable might be for, and I'll just kind of summarize my overall opinion about this and whether or not you should buy it. Okay, let me put you into the mindset of where I was 10 years ago when I purchased this turntable, and you yourself might find that I'm also in that position, right? And for me, 10 years ago, that position was, I am a lifelong music lover up until this point. I'm very serious about wanting to build a system that I can listen to. I was already like somewhat knowledgeable on records, on turntables. I had some prior experiences. And really, I was at that point where I said, I have all these records, they're worth all this money. I've spent all this money on these records, but yet my turntable is now worth, maybe like one valuable record that I own. And it's just kind of irony, really, because people have these very cheap turntables, and then on the backside of that, they're playing a $10, $12, $20,000 record collection. And I think that you really just, you will, I think, do yourself a service by evaluating and rebalancing your entire experience. And what do I mean by that? For me, I mean that, we oftentimes splurge or spend a lot of money in one category, and then we end up skimping on other categories. And I think you've got to get to a point where you can say, I have all these records and I love them, and now I'm ready, or I'm willing to invest in something that's going to last, something that's going to give me more than what my current situation is giving me. And also, like, with that, you're considering that, I'm going to continue to purchase better and better records. And then I think the other aspect of this, or where you might be in your life, is you might be saying, yeah, this is really great, I'm ready, but I've never spent this much on a turntable or really any piece of electronic equipment to listen to music. And that gives me a lot of anxiety. And I think that that's rightfully so, because when you go purchase a turntable, like I have mentioned before, you're buying this mechanical device, and there's a lot there that can go wrong. And I think if you're not knowledgeable or patient or a lot of those things, you want to feel like there's support, or there's something there, or there's somebody rather that can help me. And I think Rega is a brand that's been around for so long, and they've already, I think, passed the trials and tribulations in this audio world and have proved themselves. 10 years ago, I was kind of looking for a safe, reliable purchase that I could feel okay about. And I think ultimately that's why you choose Rega. I mean, for me, it was the reliability, it was the engineering, it was the ethos of them, and and so that's why I purchased the Rega Planar 3. So the question really is, 10 years later, where does the Rega fit into this world of record players, right, and turntables? I still think and still believe Rega is on top, probably better than they've ever been. I don't think they're a company that has a lot of competition on the horizon. There are certainly more options on the market. There might be different types of turntables or different technologies that are implemented, with that table. But when we just consider the basic mechanism of the tone arm, how that thing moves up and down, the motor, how that relates to the spindle, and really just the mechanism itself. They have a recipe that's not outdated, and it just works, right? So today, 10 years later, if somebody comes to me and asks me, should I buy a turntable? And if so, what kind of turntable should I buy? I'm going to put Rega up there as one of the options. And I think my experiences with it have led me to, just truly believe that they are what they say they are. They last, and yeah. So anyways, so this has been my 10-year review of the Rega Planar 3 2016. I'm sure that I missed a lot of things. There's things that I didn't talk about, and I apologize for that, but more or less, I think I want this review to be about my experiences, how I feel about this turntable. And really, at the end of the day, it's about asking the question, what has your long-term experience been like with this table? And are there any pitfalls? Are there any kind of major glaring issues that you've encountered with it? So anyways, thanks guys for watching. This has been the Rega Planar 3 2016 review. If you wouldn't mind hitting the subscribe button down below, I'd like to grow this channel and continue to do more videos. I'm just getting started, so yeah, thanks guys.